Good morning. Senate Appropriations Committee, Subcommittee on Labor, Health and Human Services, Education and Related Agencies will please come to order. Today we're having a hearing on the Biden administration's fiscal year 2022 budget request for the Department of Education. Senator Blunt and I will each have an opening statement, and then I will introduce our witness, Secretary Cardona. After his testimony, senators will each have 5 minutes for a round of questions, and while we are unable to have the hearing fully open yet to the public or media for in-person attendance, live video is available on our committee website, and if you are in need of accommodations, including closed captioning, you can reach out to the committee or the Office of Congressional Accessibility Services. Secretary Cardona, after years of proposed budget cuts and school privatization from your predecessor, this budget would increase education funding by 40% to $103 billion, and it's a much-needed breath of fresh air. It proposes bold investments to help our schools and students as they respond to and recover from this pandemic and address longstanding inequities in education, which COVID-19 has made even more damaging. One of the biggest issues facing our nation is getting our students back on track and addressing the lost learning time that they have experienced. We know students of color, students with disabilities, students in rural and tribal communities, students from families with low incomes have borne the brunt of this pandemic. One study, for example, found the pandemic set students of color back 3 to 5 months from where they would be in a typical year, and set white students back 1 to 3 months. We need to make sure every student, no matter who they are or where they live or how much money they or their family make, can receive the supports they need to thrive despite this pandemic. So I'm glad this budget takes the task of reckoning with these inequities seriously, with investments across a range of programs to help ensure all students can get a quality public education. It invests $20 billion in a new initiative intended to reduce disparities in public elementary and secondary education in our country, and proposes to use this funding to help public schools address a variety of issues, including inequities in state and local education funding, expanding high-quality preschool programs, and improving outcomes for all of our students. Of course, improving outcomes for students means we must also do more to support students with disabilities. This budget takes an historic step on that front by proposing a $3 billion increase for the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act. Over the years, Congress has fallen short of its promise to provide 40% of the funding to support the education of students with disabilities through IDEA. Currently, only 13% is provided, and struggling states and districts have been left to fill in the gaps. President Biden's proposal will help us better keep this promise and help schools across the country address the shortage of teachers for students with disabilities and provide early intervention services so students can get the support they need to succeed as soon as possible. And when it comes to supporting students' academic, social, emotional, and mental health needs, this budget proposes a $413 million increase for full-service community schools, an increase of $120 million for English language acquisition grants, and a new $1 billion initiative to ensure students have access to school counselors, nurses, and mental health professionals. This is especially critical given the mental health challenges students, educators, and school staff have faced during the pandemic. These challenges will persist well into the next school year. We need to make investments to support student and staff well-being, and we need to bring in more counselors, nurses, and psychologists. In Washington State, we only have one school psychologist for every 1,000 students. This budget will help us tackle inequities in higher education as well, and significantly expand support for students pursuing a post-secondary education, including by increasing the maximum Pell Grant by almost a third. This is so important. Federal support like Pell Grants allowed my 6 brothers and sisters and I to all go to college. But Pell has gone from covering 75% of the average cost of a 4-year degree at its peak to less than 30% today. We have to strengthen and expand Pell, and this budget is a clear step in the right direction. Ultimately, we need to do even more to double the maximum Pell Award over the next 6 years, protect Pell from being cut by budget shortfalls, and expand Pell Grants to more students. Today, I joined colleagues in the House and Senate to introduce legislation to accomplish all of that. And I hope to work with you, Secretary Cardona, and my colleagues here in Congress to get this done. And increased Pell Grants are just one of several investments this budget proposes to make higher education more accessible and affordable for all students. It provides funding to help implement the bipartisan FAFSA simplification bill I worked to pass last December. This will make it easier for all students to apply for financial aid, including Pell Grants, expand the number of students eligible for support, and increase financial aid to students with low incomes. It increases funding for TRIO programs, which help first-generation college students, students with disabilities, and students from families with low incomes to get to and go through college successfully. It nearly doubles funding for quality campus-based childcare to support student parents under the C Campus program. And it provides increased funding for historically under-resourced colleges and universities, including $345 million, which is a 44% increase, in funding for minority-serving institutions like historically black colleges and universities and other institutions predominantly serving low-income students like community colleges. And finally, this budget increases funding for the Department's Office for Civil Rights. Between this budget and the public hearings the Department started last week on the previous administration's inadequate Title IX rule, it's clear we have a president who's focused on protecting students no matter their race, ethnicity, religion, sex, including sexual orientation and gender identity, or disability. I'll be watching your work in this space closely and encourage the Department to continue its efforts to hear, acknowledge, and address the stories and concerns of survivors of sexual assault. I will say one area where I would like to see an increased investment is funding to support education for children and youth who are experiencing homelessness. But overall, this budget is night and day different from the previous administration. I always say a budget is a reflection of your values, and this budget shows President Biden understands the money we spend on schools, students, and public education is an investment in our future. What our nation accomplishes in the years ahead will be determined by the opportunities and support we are able to give children across the country now. I look forward to working with the administration and with my colleagues on this committee to make the investments in education we need to make so we have a brighter future for our families. With that, I will turn it over to Senator Black for his remarks.
Well, thank you, Senator Murray, and welcome to the hearing, Secretary Cardona. This is your first time to appear before this committee, and I'm sure by the end of the hearing you'll be looking forward to next year when you get to come back and the other discussions we'll have between now and then. I was glad we had a chance to talk not only during the confirmation process, but again yesterday, and look for more opportunities to do that. Certainly the last year has been one of the most challenging years for students, for parents, for school administrators, for teachers, for everybody in the education field, including those people like cafeteria workers and bus drivers who, in a virtual setting, wound up without a job while everybody else's jobs became maybe even longer in a day to get ready for the new challenges of virtual education where that occurred, and to try to get back to school as quickly as they could. You know, you and I are both first-generation college graduates, and we've both been classroom teachers, and so I think because of that, hopefully we have an understanding of just how important education is and what a difference just a slight change at points along the way of your trajectory of where you think your life can take you can make for the people we taught, just like we both saw happen with us. We also understand the critical role education plays in our society, our ability to compete around the world, the values that we transmit from one generation to another, all very important. I'm a proud supporter of many of the programs we're going to be talking about today: career and technical education, state grants, IDEA, Title I, the TRIO programs, school-based mental health that you and I talked about yesterday. Now, I'm concerned about the spending level. I just heard the chair mention the importance of this huge increase of about 41% in spending. I think that increase on top of the $280 billion in COVID-19 supplemental funding for education last year is a lot of input into the system in a very short period of time. In fact, last year's spending was about 4 times as much as the department normally receives in annual appropriations each year. This year, the request is 102.8 billion, dollars, which is almost $30 billion or 41% greater than last year's spending. It's a lot of money to try to put into the system all at once. I look forward to hearing your plans and hopefully some of your concerns about how that much new funding going into the system would go in the best possible way. As a former university president, I'm particularly concerned about the proposal to make community college tuition free for all students. My view is if you want to make college education really expensive, make it free. But we'll talk about that. We'll talk about what we're doing now to make it possible for people to go to college and what you're proposing in terms of making those first 2 years free at community colleges. I would point out that in the average community college in America, if you qualify for the full Pell Grant, you have more money in that grant than books, fees, and tuition. I think the average Pell Grant recipient was $3,946. The average tuition and fees at community colleges was $3,700. I think there may be other ways to make it possible for more people to go to community college and all other schools without cost, but we're going to talk about that today and as we move forward with this budget. Many states across the country already have programs that make up the difference in a community college. In Missouri, the A-plus scholarship pays the community college tuition for eligible students for up to 2 years. I do think those colleges play an incredibly important role in the country, both as an access point for education, but also as a way to get people ready for jobs that are that are available or could be available in a specific community. I am concerned that free community college for everybody unfairly subsidizes higher income students, and if it's community college only, creates an incentive for students to attend schools that may not be the best fit for them. Through the Pell Grant, limited taxpayer dollars have targeted students in the most need. It maintains the ability of students, the Pell Grant, and most of our other programs to pick institutions that best meet their individual needs. Since this committee worked to reinstate with Senator Murray and I working hard to lead on that effort to reinstate year-round Pell Grants, students have the flexibility to accelerate their post-secondary studies and complete their programs more quickly. I'm pleased to see that the budget does not include widespread loan forgiveness. It hasn't outlined a plan at the same time for borrowers to get back into the repayment process. Federal student loan borrowers have gone for over a year without making a payment without being required to make a payment on their loans. And I think it's important that the department begins communicating to those borrowers early and often to ensure that all borrowers understand their responsibilities and their repayment options when a payment or a loan comes due October 1 of this year. I don't see any discussion about that in the comments you're making today, and it's something I'd like to see more thought given to. I'm also concerned that the department hasn't announced how student loan servicing will be handled moving forward once the legacy servicing contracts and later end later this year. We've spent a lot of time in this committee looking at past proposals on changing that system. As you and I discussed yesterday, I look forward to hearing your thoughts as to how that system moved forward. We both support increased educational opportunities in every state, such as Title I and IDEA, it's my goal to find ways we can work together. This budget proposes a 10% increase, or $120 million in discretionary funding for career and technical education, teamed with $1 billion in mandatory funding for a new career pathways program. I do think it's critically important we provide students with meaningful information about the jobs that are out there when we can, with work-based learning opportunities and exposure to different career paths early in high school. We've been talking about that for some time. There's a lost decade for so many people from the time they graduate till the time they really settle into the career that provides the most promise and the most satisfaction for them. So I look forward to working together on this. I know we're going to have a number of questions and concerns about this budget, but it's a critically important part of how people move forward in our country, giving them those opportunities and the information they need. And I look forward to working with you to find the appropriate balance between fiscal responsibility and meaningful investment that supports access to quality education for all students. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Blunt. Our witnesses today is Miguel Cardona, Secretary of the Department of Education. Secretary Cardona, thank you for joining us today, and I'm so glad you could be here. I look forward to your testimony, and you may begin now.
Thank you. Good morning, Chairwoman Murray, Ranking Member Blunt, and distinguished members of the subcommittee. I recently attended an international thespian induction ceremony at a high school where students were being inducted for their commitment to theater after this long year. My daughter was one of those students. I can tell you it was the first time we came together as a school community in over a year. So the room was filled with a lot of emotion. One thing caught my eye. There was a banner hanging that had a quote from the renowned poet Alexander Pope. And the banner read, "Act well your part. There all the honor lies." In other words, do your part, and that's where you'll find the honor. I come to you today representing the Department of Education as we boldly do our part to serve the students across the country. That's our responsibility and our privilege, and that's where our collective honor lies. To that end, I'm proud to testify today about President Biden's fiscal year 2022 budget request for the Department of Education because it makes good on the President's campaign commitment to invest in education. It also begins to address the significant inequities that students, primarily students of color, confront every day in schools in pursuit of higher education and career technical education. I want to thank members of the subcommittee and your staff who've helped ensure the passage of the American Rescue Plan, bringing vital resources to our schools and colleges across the country. The American Rescue Plan funds will ensure that school buildings reopen for full-time in-person instruction safely and quickly. I come to you today with a great sense of urgency about the work we have to do. Generations of inequity have left far too many students without equitable access to high-quality, inclusive learning opportunities, including in our rural communities. Education can be the great equalizer like it was for me and for many of you. But we have to prioritize, replicate, and invest in what works for all students, not just some. We must do more to level the playing field, including providing a strong foundation from birth, improving diversity among the teacher workforce, creating learning pathways that work for all students. To that end, the budget proposal calls on Congress to invest nearly $103 billion in the Department of Education's programs, a 41% increase over the fiscal year 2021 appropriation to support students' success. The fiscal year 2022 request also makes a meaningful down payment toward the Biden-Harris administration's goal of reversing inequities. That's what's at stake here, reversing inequities. The centerpiece is a proposal for a new $20 billion Title I equity grants program that would address inequities and disparities between under-resourced schools and their wealthier counterparts. It would support competitive compensation for teachers in Title I schools, expand access to pre-kindergarten, and increase preparation for, access to, and success in rigorous coursework. Our request would put the nation on a path to double the number of school counselors, nurses, and mental health professionals in our schools, and significantly expand support for community schools to help increase the availability of wraparound services to students and families in underserved schools and communities. The pandemic reinforced the need for this. We also think it's past time for the federal government to make good on its commitment to students with disabilities and their families. And the request makes a significant move toward full funding of IDEA, proposing a 20% increase for IDEA state grants of $2.6 billion. Turning to higher education, an area that needs immediate attention. Our budget proposal begins the Biden-Harris administration's critical work to increase access and affordability for students. The budget proposal, coupled with increased proposed in the American Families Plan, would be the largest increase to Pell Grant ever, helping millions of students and families pursue their goals. Importantly, our proposal would ensure that Dreamers may also receive Pell Grants if they meet current eligibility requirements. The fiscal year 2022 request paints a bold picture for the future of our institutional and student support programs. The budget increases institutional capacity and student supports at minority-serving institutions with additional funding for HBCUs, Hispanic-serving institutions, Asian American and Native American Pacific Islander-serving institutions, and tribally controlled colleges and universities, as well as our beloved TRIO and Gear Up programs to help ensure underserved students succeed and graduate from college. Finally, we would prioritize efforts to enforce civil rights laws related to education through a 10% increase for the Office for Civil Rights to protect students and advance equity in educational opportunity and delivery in preschool through college. This is a fundamental right we are committed to for all students. Working together with stakeholders, including students and educators, we can and will heal, learn, and grow together during this challenging time. I'm committed to working collaboratively with each of you to strengthen our schools and campuses and to help improve opportunities, pathways, and outcomes for students across the country, including students in our rural communities. Thank you, and I look forward to answering any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Mr. Secretary. We will now begin a round of 5-minute questions of our witness, and I ask our colleagues to please keep track of your clock, stay within those 5 minutes. Mr. Secretary, the President's budget calls for major investments in our nation's public schools, acknowledging the significant resource disparities between schools serving more students from families with low incomes and their wealthier peers. These resource discrepancies contribute to the achievement gap between students of color, who represent more than half of our students served in Title I schools, and white students. One of the key provisions we included in the reauthorization of the Elementary and Secondary Education Act is a requirement to review the resource inequities in schools which have been identified for support and improvement. And we also included a requirement for per-pupil expenditure reporting for all states and school districts in the nation, a requirement that still has not been fully implemented years after we passed the law. I believe the combination of additional federal education investments, accurate and timely reporting, and thoughtful review of how all education funds are being allocated and used in schools needing additional support would improve the quality of education services for all of our students and families. I know the pandemic has likely impacted the implementation of these resource allocation reviews, but can you share your plans for supporting and monitoring state and local agencies conducting these reviews, as well as your plans for ensuring states and school districts do comply with the SEA's fiscal equity reporting requirements?
Thank you, Senator Murray. And you start with an issue that's critically important that we must address together. The opportunity gaps and achievement disparities and outcomes is significant. So much so that I've been an educator for over 20 years. It's almost become normalized. And we have an opportunity here to address it. With the budget proposal and the American Families Plan, there's a transformational opportunity for our country to not only recover from the pandemic, but to be better than we ever were before in education. And I look forward to ensuring that every penny that's allocated is used to support our students in a way that's equitable. You know, we talk a lot about education being the great equalizer. Well, this budget proposes strategies to get there. And it is important for me to make sure that while the resources are there, we have equal amounts of accountability to make sure that the funds are being used for what they were intended. So absolutely, to me, the work that we do at the agency to ensure that the funds are being used to what they were intended for is critically as important as providing resources. We can't get to equalizing the playing field if the resources are not being used where they're supposed to. So I and the team at the Department of Education will be very vigilant, especially with this new American Rescue Plan and the funding that has been provided over the last year. We're going to be vigilant to make sure that the funds are being used for what they're intended to be used for. And I'll add that as we rolled out the American Rescue Plan, we required states to provide transparent reports on how they were going to use the money and engage stakeholders so they are a part of the process early and ensure that equity is at the heart of the plan. I envision this being something that's going to help lift our students, and I look forward to working with you and others to make sure it happens.
Okay, thank you. And on higher ed, the pandemic really exacerbated, as you know, the financial challenges a lot of our students face pursuing a post-secondary education. Congress, as you know, responded by providing significant relief to students and borrowers, including flexible funding to address students' basic needs during this pandemic. But as our country begins to recover from this pandemic, many of the financial strains that are facing students who are low-income, students of color, student parents, first-generation students, are really out there for them. This isn't just the cost of tuition and fees I'm talking about, but housing, food, childcare, unexpected bills that can quickly derail a student's plans. And as we turn this corner on COVID, we should redouble our efforts to help all students pursuing a post-secondary education. And this budget, I think, is a positive step in that direction, but can you speak for a moment about the increases for Pell Grants and childcare for student parents, TRIO, why those investments are so critical right now?
Thank you, Senator. We recognize now that if we don't act with urgency, we're going to lose many of our students who are thinking about higher education as an opportunity to continue their growth. The increase in Pell Grants, which is significant under the American Families Plan, $1,400, and $400 increase here in this budget, show the commitment that the President has toward ensuring equitable access to higher education for our students. And we recognize that with other supports are going to allow for our students to continue to engage in college, free community college for students. Talk about giving an opportunity to students who might not even think of higher education because it's too far off, or the fear of being in debt for the rest of their lives. With that said, the pause on loan repayment has provided saved over $5 billion a month for over 41 million borrowers. So we know how critically important that is. It's covered 1.1 million borrowers in the process. But programs like the Pell Increase provide access to college for many more students. And we're confident with support of programs like that and programs like TRIO, more and more students will look at higher education as an option for themselves.
Okay, thank you very much. Senator Blunt.
Thank you, Chairman. Secretary, let's talk a little about the first 2 years of college education free, or at least if you choose to go to a community college. I'm much more inclined to be receptive to your arguments about increasing the Pell Grant, increasing even the level of maybe whether you qualify for that maximum Pell sooner. What are you thinking about in terms of 2 years of free community college education. I'm a big supporter of the community college system. Every community college in my state, I believe, understands that. But I don't quite understand, one, why we want to make community college free for everybody regardless of need. And then my second question is going to be, why just community colleges? But how do you expect this plan to work? And would all students who choose a community college have no cost of going to that college?
Thank you, Senator. I recognize that there are many states that are doing amazing work providing access to higher education institutions. I was in Michigan recently, and I saw amazing efforts there to make college affordable and accessible to the students in Michigan. But this plan would allow 5.5 million students to have access to higher education who might not have had it previous. And we know that not only is it a benefit for these students, but it's a benefit for their families, their community, and there's an economic benefit. Graduates of two-year colleges, on average, earn 21% more than students with a high school diploma. And we know that the skills that are needed in the workforce today are skills that would require some level of training. So with good coordination, our free community colleges connecting with our high schools, connecting with the workforce, and four-year colleges, which stand to gain because there's going to be a wider net of students seeking higher education. We do feel that this is a step forward for the country.
Good. I don't disagree with any of those thoughts, except your point that there would be, I think you said 5 million students that wouldn't have access to community college otherwise. What about all the students that could go to community college otherwise are we now paying that tuition as well?
Many of those students are benefiting from supports now. What we're doing is leveling.
That's not what I'm asking. What I'm asking is, if any student at any income level wants to go to community college, can they go for free under this program?
Yes, it would be accessible to all who want to study in community college.
So let's go to a second question. Why would you focus that first 2 years on a community college when students might want to even qualify, for instance, a Pell Grant now? They can take that Pell Grant money and go to any college, any accredited institution, public or private, they want to. And many of those institutions now with fully qualified Pell students figure out how there's no other cost beyond Pell. Why would you not allow them to continue to have that same ability to go free to those schools as well if they're students in real economic need?
Under this proposal, students will still have the choice to attend the college that they'd like, benefiting from the Pell programs if they're eligible. So it doesn't limit options. If anything, it provides more options and provide more opportunity for students who might not have considered higher education an option for them due to the costs.
What about generally, I continue to hear this discussion, we should have free first 2 years of college or free college for everybody, but that almost always talks about a college in a public school setting as opposed to an accredited school setting. I think one of the real strengths of the American higher education system since World War II has been virtually all of our programs, whether they were the GI benefit or Pell Grants or any other federal government program, you had the ability to use that at any accredited post-secondary institution. What's your view on that as we continue to discuss how access to various levels of grants and fundings, public versus both public and private, competing with each other after high school?
Thank you, Senator. I look forward to continuing conversations with you and others to find the right pathway. What we want to do is provide access to higher education for students across the country. We know that access to higher education affords students the opportunities to better options in life, higher earning potential. And that's good not only for the student, but for their community and in the economy, as I said earlier. So I'm a big proponent of providing options for students who want to pursue different careers or different educational institution based on their choice. And I would be in support of exploring options to make sure that that's accessible under this plan.
Well, the current system, as you know, creates lots of options to accredited institutions. I hope that continues to be the case, and certainly something you and I will continue to talk about. Thank you, Secretary. Thank you, Chairman.
Senator Shaheen.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Mr. Secretary, we're delighted to have you here today. I want to start with a challenge that we're having in New Hampshire. As you know, Congress has provided nearly $200 billion for emergency relief for elementary and secondary schools as a result of the COVID pandemic. This funding was intended to assist schools during this emergency, and Congress was very clear when we passed that legislation that the intent of these funds is to allow them to be used at the school's discretion to meet a wide variety of local needs, including for construction projects such as HVAC repairs and improvements. I am very concerned about the delays that many New Hampshire schools have experienced when trying to access this relief funding, and I've been troubled by the department's delay in issuing clear implementation guidance that regards regulatory requirements on states and school districts. Now, I appreciate the guidance that was just provided by the department to New Hampshire yesterday. I hope it resolves some of this uncertainty, but there are still questions that schools have, and in order for them to benefit from this money, we have a limited time for construction during the summer, and so it would be really important to have the department be very clear on the use of these funds. So can you talk a little bit about how the department is working to allow expeditious access to the funds that have been approved and appropriated by Congress?
Thank you, Senator. You're absolutely right, the importance of being expedient in the use of funds to get them into the schools, to provide the resources that are needed to get the students what they need to be in the classroom quickly and as safely as possible. And with the distribution of funds, we recognize that different parts of the country have different needs. I was in Philadelphia recently, and I learned how the ventilation issues in those schools prevented students from coming in at the same rate as communities that had schools that were a bit newer and had better ventilation. So in that particular area, the issue was ventilation. So what we want to do is balance flexibility around how the funds are used with ensuring that the funds are being used to safely reopen schools and address inequities that were exacerbated during the pandemic. And by the strategies that we're taking is becoming accessible and making sure we're working with states on their individual needs and their individual challenges. We've worked closely with various states, meeting with them and having conversations with not only their educators, but their elected officials to ensure the maintenance of effort is being kept and that the funds are being moved quickly to help the schools and getting out to the LEAs as soon as possible. And we'll continue to do that.
Well, I appreciate that, but that hasn't happened as expeditiously in New Hampshire as the school districts really need it to happen. The ventilation systems, the HVAC systems are clearly an issue in many of our schools. And again, when Congress passed these funds, we tried to make it very clear that we wanted them to be as flexible as possible for use by the schools. So as you point out, the more the department can be accommodating and working with states on their needs as quickly as possible, the better. So do I have your commitment that the department will continue to work with the state of New Hampshire?
We will be on the phone with New Hampshire today, Senator.
Thank you. All right. I'm going to hold you to that. You and Senator Murray talked a little bit about the student loan program and the effort to help address the challenge that many students are facing. This moratorium is scheduled to end September 30th. I just wonder if the department considers that the final date of the moratorium. Are you looking at a further extension? One of the challenges we've heard from people is needing certainty as they're thinking about going back to school, both loan agencies and students themselves.
Yeah. You know, we are aiming to provide as much of an on-ramp for these borrowers as possible, and the date in September or payments restarting in October is something that we have, but we are continuing conversations about if that's the best time. No announcements today, but we continue to have those conversations. We recognize that for many families, the recovery of this pandemic will come around the same time. Students are going to be returning to schools. Mortgages have to start getting paid, and loans have to start getting paid. So we want to make sure we're sensitive to the needs of the borrowers and aware of the other challenges that they have. We're going to continue to do as much as we can with our authorities. Just today, we're announcing $500 million in new discharges for over 18,000 borrowers who attended ITT Technical College, Technical Institute, just to make sure that every authority that we have currently, we're taking advantage of it to support our borrowers who are in need. And we do want to provide timely information, as Senator Blunt also mentioned, and make sure we have as long an on-ramp for these borrowers to start repayment.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that, and I know that it's a huge concern for borrowers, but the sooner decisions can be made, I think the better people can plan.
Thank you.
So thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Senator Moran.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thank you for your presence today. Let me just highlight a couple of things that I'm pleased with, and that would be IDEA. The increased funding support for that is valuable. Commitments were made a long time ago, and those commitments have not been kept for a long time. And a significant component of our success in education will be our ability to educate those who need the IDEA aspect of our public education system. And I look forward to working with you to see that we continue to provide additional support for those students. I also want to highlight the importance of impact aid. Kansas with Fort Riley and Fort Leavenworth, they are hugely important to assist our school districts that have a large presence of public lands. I look forward to working with you to see we support impact aid and its ability to level a playing field in the finance of education in my state. Let me ask a question about TRIO. The Biden administration proposed investing $62 billion in new college retention and completion services. This, to me, seems unnecessary spending on a duplicative program when we have TRIO programs. And I noticed in your comments you bragged about the significance and value of TRIO, but what is the circumstance that suggests that this is not duplicative or that the resources that you are putting into new programs could not be utilized in the TRIO programs to achieve the same outcome?
Thank you, Senator. And I do agree that the investment in special education is so needed. I've spoken to families of children with disabilities, in particular families with children with autism, who have said, the laptop alone is not going to cut it. So I'm hopeful that our students with disabilities are going to get the support that they need. And that we're on a path to fully funding it. With regard to the TRIO programs, one thing we've heard is students who are in our community colleges or in our four-year colleges, due to the pandemic, have had to leave. And there's a lot of concern whether or not they're going to be able to come back. And we also know that this translates into high school students who were maybe once thinking about going to college, not having that opportunity, or having to work now to supplement the income of the home and have other factors that are pulling them in a different direction. So the $200 million increase in the TRIO programs, to me, addresses what we know to be the case, what we're hearing from educators, what we're hearing from families, what we're hearing from students is that going to college for some students who might have been considering it seems a little bit more far removed. And we want to make sure we're addressing that so that we do continue to have students in colleges across the country.
Well, my concern is not that you're increasing the TRIO program by $200 billion. It is, if TRIO is a valuable program, which I believe it is, why would we create new programs with new funding, the $62 billion, without further utilizing the TRIO programs that already exist? We have a habit, I think, in Congress, and I can't imagine that an administration is immune. We in politics and public policy have a habit when we try to highlight the value, the importance we place on something, we create a new program. And my suggestion is, my request is an understanding of why current programs, such as TRIO, wouldn't be the vehicle by which you deliver new assistance. There's lots of schools in Kansas and across the country that would love to have a TRIO program, would love to expand the number of TRIO programs they have. Those are restrained in many instances because of lack of funding, and yet we're putting significant new dollars into a new program, which I would suggest has a pretty similar objective as TRIO.
Thank you, Senator. Well, we want to make sure we have opportunities for all students. And I agree with you, the TRIO program is successful when it's able to get students into college. And I hear your question. You're saying, why are we duplicating services if TRIO does similar? I look forward to working with you to discuss this further, and would be happy to have conversations about where you feel we should be looking at things and combining them instead of setting new programs.
I look forward to working with you, and I was particularly interested in your response to Senator Blunt's question, which the answer, at least to me, was incomplete, and I'd be welcoming to see why the ideas that Senator Blunt suggested are ones that don't, in your view, have merit. Thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Durbin.
Thanks, Madam Chairman. Mr. Secretary, thanks for being here.
Glad to be here.
This is not a trick question, but do you have any idea what percent of post-secondary students in America enroll in for-profit colleges and universities?
Off the top of my head, sir, I don't, but I can get you that information.
I tell you what it is. I'm going to give you the answer, and it's not to trick you. It's 8%. 8% post-secondary students in America enroll in for-profit colleges and universities. Next question. What percent of student loan defaults in America are accounted for by for-profit college students?
I have a feeling you're going to share that answer with me, sir, so I'll turn it back to you.
As I said, I'm not trying to trick you. 30.
30.
8% of the students, 30% of the student loan defaults. What does it tell us? It tells us they're enrolling students who can't finish, won't finish. It tells us also they're charging money that students can't repay even if they're employed. 8%, 30%. As often as I meet you here each year, I'm going to ask you the same question because the numbers don't change. But here's what's interesting. In the COVID-19 situation, colleges and universities across America are generally struggling for enrollment, except for the for-profit schools. They've seen a 3% increase in students. How can that be? Are they that good? They market and advertise constantly. You don't have to turn on television or look into the news except to see the latest ad for them. Now, the reason I raise that is because I think that raises a serious policy question about a branch of higher education that is failing so many students and yet receives such a handsome federal subsidy. Now, you have many roles as Secretary of Education, educator, principal, president of the university, all these things, all of the above, and you certainly have the background for it. But there's one aspect of your responsibility that I want to delve into that is not often brought up. You are one of the nation's biggest bill collectors. You're a credit agency. You're a banker. And I want to tell you, the record that was written by your predecessor in this field is not one that I think we want to see continue. For example, if I might, public service loan forgiveness. Are you familiar with it?
Sure.
Do you know what the DeVos administration did with public service loan forgiveness? I'll tell you. 99% of those who applied were denied. That is just outrageous. And Congress tried to extend the program with a new version. That was ignored as well. So Secretary DeVos was channeling Henry Potter and not George Bailey many, many times. When it came to borrower defense, of 108,000 students who applied and said that they were the victims of fraud by for-profit colleges and universities, the DeVos Education Department, as they were leaving town, denied 80,000 of them after waiting month after month and year after year. The lives of these borrowers have been compromised. Now, I don't know how familiar you are with ECMC. Has your staff given you a briefing on your collection agency?
Yes.
They have? Well, I will tell you, the last point I want to make before I turn it over for your response is this. They are outrageous. The policies that they use to collect on student loans, I don't think any of us want to try to defend in public. If someone goes into bankruptcy court and tries, with the one narrow exception to the bankruptcy code for student loans, undue hardship, they don't have a chance. ECMC is going to beat them back. Whether or not you're dealing with veterans, who are so disabled that they can't pay back their loans, people subsisting on Social Security disability, people with terminal illness. They're all beaten back and denied by your collection agency. So, open question, what would you like to do about it?
Thank you, Senator Durbin, for bringing out the facts, and something that I'll be very frank with you is the top priority at the agency. We've done a disservice, and it's time to act. It's time to have our students at the center of the conversations there. It's a high priority for me to make sure that we correct that. It's unacceptable to have 98, 99% refusal with public service loan forgiveness. I had a conversation with students who had to go through that process and were given the runaround. I was frustrated after that call. They had to hold on and go through different hoops to try to get an answer, and then the answers weren't accurate, and they had to go somewhere else. So there's a lot of work that has to be done. I recently hired Richard Cordray. He was recently appointed by the president. And we need to have a consumer protection mentality. We need to put the students at the center of the conversation, and we need to make sure that what we're doing at the agency is a model for what we expect, and we have to put our loan providers on notice that we are going to put the students first. We haven't been sitting around waiting either, though. We've provided $1.5 billion in relief through borrower defense by delivering $1 billion in full relief to 72,000 borrowers and approving $500 million in discharges, as I mentioned, with ITT. So we're taking every opportunity now to change the culture there. And the message is very clear to Richard. Fix this. Fix this and move quickly and be transparent and change the culture that people perceive, as you pointed out. We have a culture to change, and we have to implement strategies better. Our students can't wait, and we're contributing to the problem. You will see a turnaround in that. That's a priority for me.
Thank you. Channel Charge Bailey. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I will turn to myself and then Senator Blunt for a second round. I would just notify all committee members and staff to please tell your members to be here because if there is no one else present after that time, we will wrap up this hearing. I know, Mr. Secretary, you are sad to hear that.
I am.
Mr. Secretary, the President's budget calls for major new investments in our nation's public elementary and secondary schools totaling $66 billion. That is an increase of $25 billion more than last year's LHHS bill. Now, Republicans and Democrats were able to work together on COVID relief and our regular appropriations bills last year. The $125 billion in K-12 education investments included in the American Rescue Plan Act passed earlier this year did not have bipartisan support, and some of our Republican colleagues expressed concern that those funds would not be spent quickly or were unnecessary. Tell us why you think the additional K-12 investments proposed in the President's budget are needed on top of the significant COVID supplemental appropriations that are already enacted into law.
The technical support that the allocations provide are critical, and I'll get into that. But let me first talk about how important it is that the President signaled a transformational change in how we view education as the foundation of our country's growth. As the First Lady said, any country that out-educates us outperforms us. So this administration understands the important investment in education. And I don't have to remind you, because you mentioned it in your opening comments. Years of underinvestment in education. I've seen that. I was a principal when we were asked to do more with less. I had class sizes that were very high, with teachers who were doing their very best to meet the needs of students, and those needs kept increasing, but the funds kept decreasing. There's a realization here that if we don't get this right, so much else is going to suffer. So when we talk about what this investment can turn into, it can turn into smaller class sizes. It can turn into better teacher preparation. Students are coming back from a trauma-filled year. I spoke to a student at Harvey Milk School 2 days ago in New York who told me his grandmother and his significant other died in the last year. This student is going back to school. If we're not investing in additional trauma support, training to make sure everyone, including our school bus drivers, our cafeteria aides who have been heroes this past year, have the support and training to help meet the needs of these students when they come in, then we don't stand a chance. if we're not providing funds to give students access to digital devices and broadband so that they could have access to learning wherever they are, then we lost an opportunity. The pandemic exacerbated the need. You mentioned it in your opening comments, the impact that it's having on our poor communities. In our rural communities, students didn't have access to broadband during the entire pandemic. We cannot continue under-investing in education and think that we're going to continue to produce students that are going to lead the world. We have an opportunity here, an obligation, a privilege, to make sure we're funding our schools, giving our educators the tools that they need to be successful. More importantly, giving our students the tools that they need to be successful. Imagine our country when students don't have to worry about not having a teacher in front of their classroom, enough materials, or access to technology so that they could get access to basic deliverables in education. That's where we're going, and this bill does that. The American Family Plan boldly communicates that, and I'm excited about supporting it moving forward.
Thank you. Really appreciate that response. Mr. Secretary, too many students miss out on college financial aid that they are eligible for, like Pell Grants, in part because the application process has been so cumbersome. Last December, we were able to finally reach a bipartisan agreement to significantly simplify the federal student aid application process with the passage of FAFSA Simplification Act. And that law, by the way, also expands eligibility for federal financial aid. The administration's budget request does include a significant increase in funding to implement those and other related changes. But unfortunately, the department announced last week, as you know, that some of those changes cannot be implemented quite as fast as all of us had really hoped. This isn't a criticism of the department. Everyone wants the law implemented as quickly as possible. But tell us what the department is doing to implement FAFSA as quickly as possible, including moving forward with key benefits for students on time.
Thank you. And I recognize it's not a criticism, but we need to get moving on this. And I thank you and Senator Blunt and others who've really pushed this and understand the importance of that simplification process. I've talked to students who said, you know what, that's too much, or families, I can't do that. And they've missed out an opportunity. So the simplification process is critically important. But the reality is, we walked in to a system that doesn't have the capacity. As I mentioned in the previous statement, underinvestment leads to results. Well, we have a 45-year-old computer system that can't handle the changes that are needed and that you voted for. So we need to move quickly, swiftly, to make sure we're prioritizing that. That's critically important, the FAFSA simplification. We're on it. We're going to prioritize that. Again, another area that Richard is really prioritizing. And we're going to keep you updated. You deserve to be updated on what progress we're making, what challenges we have. That is a priority for the agency and for me as Secretary.
Thank you very much. Senator Blunt.
Thank you, Chair. On the topic of new money to schools, Congress provided in the American Rescue Plan and the COVID supplementals a total of $190 billion to K through 12 education. According to data provided to us by the department, as of June 4, less than $9 billion of that has actually been spent by schools. What can we do to ensure that that money gets spent and there's more transparency about how and where it's being spent?
Thank you for that question. And it gives me an opportunity to share that as a Commissioner of Education, during the beginning of the pandemic and throughout most of the pandemic, we also had to develop systems that didn't exist before to distribute money in this unprecedented time, to make sure that LEAs had the support they needed. And as the Senator mentioned earlier, in some places that process is slower than we would like. So we're in communication with our districts, our state LEAs, and we recognize, however, and I can tell you from experience that a good portion, sometimes 80% of the budget is human resources, right? So that money is drawn down as the contract or the year goes by. And we recognize also that this is a 3 to 4 year process where the funds are going to be used to provide services for multiple years. Also, contracts that are signed off on are not paid for until the services are provided. And in many cases, that extends years. So we recognize the need. I think the transparency, what you brought up, is critically important. We asked that any planning that's being done for funds with the American Rescue Plan have transparency, that are posted on websites, and that engage stakeholders so that folks know how the money is being used. We have a responsibility to ensure every dollar of taxpayer money is being used to support what it was intended to use.
Right. Well, I certainly agree with that. And I think we actually assumed that more of that money would be spent on technical support and things that wouldn't have been part of the normal education system that districts had in place, as opposed to long-term contracts with individuals and things that probably were in their normal and regular budget. I hope we're looking carefully to see that that money is spent to be more ready for virtual education when we need it, and different kinds of communication when we need it. Obviously, as Senator Murray's pointed out and others have, the loss of learning in many cases to people who couldn't go to school, either they didn't engage in a virtual class or that wasn't the right that way for them to learn. Where do you think we're going to be in the fall in terms of in-person learning? What percentage of American public school students do you think will be back in school in the fall in person?
Some of the expenditures that take time, as you mentioned, are critical. Virtual learning access, broadband access, and that does take some time. With that said, I do expect 100% of the students across the country to have access to in-person learning. April data shows that 96% of K-8 students had an opportunity to learn in person, but I would argue that hybrid isn't a great option. In many cases, families can't do the hybrid option because parents have to work. It's all or nothing. I'm pushing really hard to make sure that we're addressing and we're working with states and local LEAs to address whatever factors might be preventing them from offering full in-person learning full-time for all students in the fall. That's my expectation, and we're having conversations regularly with different state leaders and local education leaders to make sure that the message is clear and that the expectation is there. The funds are there. We have to make it happen for our students, Senator.
Let's talk about loan servicing for just a minute. Certainly, as you pointed out, and I was pleased to be involved in trying to simplify those loan forms. Senator Murray and Senator Alexander in the authorizing committee last year did a great job in leading there. Now, there's been a discussion of, with Title IV additional servicers, how we connect better with students, with individuals who have student loans. This committee was not supportive of the last plan for the new generation of student loans. We're about to run out of the current framework of contracts. I think the current not-for-profit servicers contracts end between December of this year and March of next year. There appears to be no plan to replace the current system. What I'm asking is, will you use the authority you have in the FY 2021 labor bill to extend these legacy servicing contracts while you work on a long-term servicing solution, or do you expect to have a long-term servicing solution in place by December of this year?
We are working aggressively to make sure we have a system that has very high standards for loan servicers. We have to put the students at the center. While I don't have an announcement to make today, I will tell you that we plan on having an update, and we will update you within the next month or so to share what the plans are with that.
Well, I'll tell you, I've been very involved in this discussion. I'd like to be updated and would hope to be updated before you absolutely have a plan you're ready to announce. And then if, for whatever reason, that plan can't be put in place by the time these servicing agreements run out, I hope you're thinking about the authority that we gave you to extend those agreements if that was the best thing to do. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Senator. We'll be in touch.
Thank you. Senator Braun?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Remember, in our first or second conversations along the way, we've had a kind of a spirited discussion on resources that we put behind education in general. And in my opinion, education along with one's health care, we ought to be doing that as well as possible, not only through public but through the private arena as well. And post-secondary education now has the dubious distinction of being the place where costs are going up more per year than any other significant sector of our economy. Just eclipsed a few years ago the rate of increase in healthcare, which is a place since I've been here, wanted to reform and try to fix, because I think it's a broken system there in terms of what we do through the private sector and through government, because we've got the entity itself, the system, that doesn't deliver. Costs us in healthcare twice as much as what it does in other countries. So I think it's silly to pour more resources at anything that's not delivering outcomes that look like they're at least headed in the right direction. So do you think, when it comes to the results, and let's look at post-secondary education. I'll come back to secondary in a moment. Do you think we've been getting a good bang for our buck?
There's always room for improvement, Senator, and I can assure you that the team that we're assembling recognizes the importance and the time and the moment that we have to make sure we're improving access and affordability. Again, I mentioned earlier, the American Family Plan provides opportunities for students to access community colleges for free. We know how important that is to give them an opportunity to join the workforce with skills that they need to be successful, and that the earning potential of graduates of community colleges can be up to 21% higher. We have work to do, and we're going to be aggressive to making sure that students are getting a good return on investment in post-secondary education, and we're addressing the issues that exist where students are being taken advantage of or sold a bill of goods and never delivered on. We're on that, and that's a priority for me.
So my observation before I got here is that you generally don't pour resources into something until you look at what you've got that you're trying to rebuild, re-energize, or make better. And a 41% increase over fiscal 21 levels is embedded in this budget proposal. And my observation from being on a school board for 10 years to wrestling with education at the state level as a state legislator, it's not about spending more money. It's really more about finding how we change the system. To me, it's analogous to healthcare. And as long as we here, since we live with no constraints, now added in the 2.5 years I've been here, nearly $10 trillion in national debt, need to be a little more entrepreneurial, a little more concerned about changing the paradigm. And here, I see most of this just pouring more resources into something that doesn't need to tell us any more clearly that it's not delivering the goods. Before I run out of time, let me pivot back to the same point would be made in secondary education. Before you get to college, college is run away with costs that even parents are really scratching their heads. Is it worth it to send my kid into a system that 50% of the kids that go there don't pursue it, and many get a misguided degree that employers don't have a market for? Why don't we try to get it better at the secondary level and match training and skills with the high demand, high wage jobs that all of us have out there? My state of Indiana, checked with my kids, I think we got 70, 80 job openings in our own company out of a total employment of 1,200. We don't need any more 4-year degrees because the jobs that we have in a state like Indiana, where we ship out twice as many 4-year degrees as we use in state, we need better skills that are being delivered out of high school. I look at a place like Garrett High School west of Fort Wayne that catches kids and obviously parents when they're 5th graders before they go to middle school. That is something that would cost no more money, but would change a dynamic of where we need to change our emphasis in how we do things. And until education does that, until healthcare does that, I really think we're just going to be borrowing more money and putting it down a dubious hole. I won't refer to the word that comes to mind. So, quick comment on that.
Thank you. I agree with you. If we do what we've done, we're going to get what we've gotten. So, the plans discussed CTE changes. We really, if you recall in my hearing, one of my goals as Secretary of Education is to make sure we evolve our secondary schools to meet the demands of the workforce and the careers that are available today, as you mentioned, in your own community. So this is something that I'm eager to work with. Not only in the budget do we see that in there, and it's not just resources, it's a change in mindset. We're going to get there, and I look forward to working with you on that. I know the jobs plan has funds for that. Families plan. I know the president gets it. It's in the budget. We're going to make it happen, and I look forward to working with you on it.
Thank you, and I'd invite you to take a road trip to Indiana and visit some of the places that are setting the trend on what we as employers need, which is a better elementary and especially secondary education before you start pushing kids into a broken system after that.
Look forward to working with you on that. Thank you.
Senator Reed.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Welcome, Mr. Secretary. Your experience as the State Commissioner of Education is, I think, invaluable because you've seen these issues up close and personal, as they say on television. And one of the issues I hope is not debatable is the poor status of school infrastructure. And this is not just an urban issue, it's a national issue. I've been working very hard to get resources in for infrastructure repairs in schools. And also in the context of infrastructure repairs, you can do a lot of things like change the heating system to be more efficient. We discovered in the pandemic in Providence they had to teach all winter with the windows open because the HVA system, and you probably had the same situation in Connecticut, the HVA system would not support safe instruction and probably built in 1930, et cetera. I'm pushing very hard to get $100 billion in the jobs plan for the schools, and I hope you can assist me in doing that with the President and with my colleagues.
Thank you, Senator. Part of the Help Us Here tour, we visited about 9 or 10 different states and visited about 10 different schools. And as I mentioned in an earlier response, the needs in different communities post-pandemic were different. And one really stood out to me. I was in Philadelphia, and I visited schools that were over 120 years old, where the windows are shut with paint.
Mm-hmm. Lead paint.
Yeah. The students, they need better. And it really just brought to the surface what educators have known for years, that facilities do matter. But what's the first thing that goes in local budgets when there's not enough funds? The facilities maintenance. Right. I remember as Commissioner of Education talking to district leaders who said, our system hasn't been touched in years. The maintenance of the system hasn't been touched in years. The filters haven't been changed out. I learned more about MERV 13, MERV 15, and more than I ever thought I needed to know. But the point is, there's been negligence on facilities for years. And what we're finding is, in order to get students back into school safely and ensure a safe and learning environment where the community can feel confidence in their schools, when we talk about reopening schools, we have to take that into account. So I agree with you. Part of the jobs plan has the upgrade and building new public schools where it's needed, the $50 billion over 5 years. But the community colleges also need the support, and the $12 billion over 5 years there is a commitment to making sure that our facilities are safe places for our learners, for our educators, so that kids go to school, they attend regularly, and they have a learning environment where they can grow. So I agree with you there wholeheartedly, sir.
Well, thank you. And I must confess, part of my passion is the fact that my father was a school custodian. And so he would get, in fact, supervisor custodian, so he would get those calls in the middle of a winter night to go fix the boiler that was installed in 1927 or something like that. So, a further question, I had an interesting discussion with my adult education providers, and they reported that 95% of the students that they are serving come to them with virtually no literacy skills. They can't read. They might graduate from high school or at least go on the length of time they have to, but they can't read. And if they can't read, it's very difficult to train someone for a job, particularly in the sophisticated post-industrial economy. One issue, I think, is making sure we know what the literacy rates are. And I'm just wondering, do you have national, local, and state reliable statistics about literacy?
We do. We have data that we're tracking in terms of where the states are, but we have to do more. We have to do more to make them transparent and to ensure that the funds that are being used through the American Rescue Plan are aimed at addressing those literacy gaps. I'll tell you, we know in education that if a student's not reading by third grade, you're going to be intervening for the rest of that student's school career. And in the process, probably disengaging that student in ways where they can't take the courses that they want to select or think about college as early as they need to make sure they have the same opportunities as other students. But that's where I also believe, sir, that the American Family Plan and the commitment on early childhood education, 3- and 4-year-old programs, I saw as a principal, when 5-year-olds walked into the kindergarten classroom on day one, we knew which students had access to high-quality programs. We could tell which students didn't. And we knew, day one, kindergarten, which students were going to need intervention and support. So we pay now or pay later. We really need to focus on early childhood education and literacy skills early, science-based, research-based practices to make sure that we're allowing our students to have the best opportunity in life by reading by third grade.
I agree, but we also have to pay attention to adults who will miss these prospective reforms, but still are owed literacy skills. And thank you. My time has expired.
Thank you, sir.
Senator Hyde-Smith.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Secretary, for being here. I absolutely love your background that you have, and it's very obvious that you really get it.
Thank you.
And I appreciate that because I can tell by your passion that you know exactly what these students are going through. So that I truly want you to know how much I appreciate that.
Thank you.
As we know from COVID, so many kids got just really far behind in so many areas, and great concern, not just in Mississippi, but everywhere. But Mississippi has recently received significant American Rescue Plan funding to help reopen our schools. The reality is that most Mississippi schools have been open for in-person learning for nearly 10 months, as many Mississippi schools resumed classroom instructions last August. We really got back in quick with good results and made some good decisions there that our leaders made. But the school year for most Mississippi schools ended in early May, and students are already out for their summer break. In your submitted testimony, you stated that the plans to reopen are bold and will require coordination among key stakeholders at the federal, state, and local levels. However, this statement and several others from the department seems to ignore the fact that many other states like Mississippi have been open since fall of 2020. So we have this money, but we've already been open. But how much flexibility are schools being given to use the American Rescue Plan funding? Because that's the calls that I get, and that's the questions that I get from my schools and my educators.
Yeah. Thank you, first of all, for your comments and for the thoughts that you're bringing up on behalf of the constituents you serve. And like you, my own children have attended since August, and I've been fortunate, and so are the students in Mississippi, that were able to attend in person early, safely. That's critical. So we know, as I mentioned in a previous response, that the impact of COVID affected some regions differently than other regions, and we have to be aware of that and provide the flexibilities where needed. We recognize that in some places, while students have been in school, it might have been in a hybrid model, or some students have had access more than other students due to whether it's confidence or trauma with the pandemic. Some students will still need support, even if they're going into school maybe half-time or full-time even. We also know that summer learning will help bridge those gaps of learning that were experienced through the disruption of COVID-19. So flexibility is important. And what we're trying to do is balance flexibility while making sure that the impacts of COVID-19 are being addressed with the American Rescue Plan, as was the expectation from Congress. So we're working closely with states to communicate flexibilities, and we're available if there are questions in Mississippi to discuss how their plans are being rolled out, and questions that they might have around flexibilities or adherences to specific requirements that might have come out of the agency.
So all we have to do is really contact your department and for these individual questions, because I know they have some really good ideas, but we want to make sure we're following the guidelines the way that we're supposed to be doing that.
Sure, Senator. We do encourage innovation also. So we look forward to hearing it. As a matter of fact, we'll reach out just to make sure that we're partnering with Mississippi to make sure that their questions are answered and that we can promote as much flexibility to meet the needs of the students as needed.
Thank you, and I have a little time left. We have 7 charter schools operating in Mississippi. And, charter schools have given parents the flexibility to decide which school best fits their child's needs individually, and not the government in some instances. Charter schools also have the freedom to adapt their classrooms as they see fit. And over the years, charter schools have seen increases in academic gains. We've had a lot of success there, which allow children more opportunities as they continue in their academic career. And with your commitment to ensuring all students have access to a quality education, how will you support school choice in order to expand access to higher quality charter schools?
I'm a big proponent of high quality schools for all students across the country. And I recognize that students have options, and public charter schools are options for students. And I feel that all schools should be held to similar standards of accountability, and I think that is where I stand with that. I've seen examples of schools that needed a lot of intervention, but I've also seen examples of schools that really met the needs of the student and the families in a charter school.
Because we have really had some good luck. We had Senator Michael Watson, state senator at the time, really worked on this a long time. He's Secretary of the State right now. But it really proved that we made a lot of ground there that were good decisions and beneficial. So you will continue to support funding for the charter school program? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah, the president made it very clear. We're not going to be promoting private charter school growth, but we are endorsing the programs that exist now where students are taking advantage of public charter schools.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chairman.
Thank you. My understanding is Senator Manchin is going to walk in the door behind me at any moment. He will be our last questioner. While we're waiting for him, Mr. Secretary, I just wanted to thank you and your staff for all the hard work implementing the American Rescue Plan Act and other COVID-19 relief legislation and the FY21 appropriations bill. I know you got a lot on your plate. And I know the department's really in the process of reviewing the state plans that are being submitted for each state's final 1/3 share of ESSER allocations under the American Rescue Plan. One of my priorities really is that the legislation is the required state and school district set-asides for evidence-based interventions that address the academic and social and emotional needs of students with color, students experiencing homelessness, underserved students.
Yeah, right.
And I really appreciate the department's template for state plans that include descriptions of state strategies for carrying out these required activities and strategies for states to support these district plans. Can you just assure us that the department will only approve high-quality plans that effectively address the requirements of the law?
Yes, as I said at the beginning, that's where the honor lies, making sure that we're serving our students. And on behalf of the 50 million students, when we review those plans, we want to ensure that we're building back better and that the plans are addressing the inequities that were exacerbated by the pandemic, and that the plans engage our stakeholders in different ways, because that's critically important. Many folks who were already struggling in school or prior to the pandemic are now further away. So we need to engage them to make sure that the schools that we're reopening are welcoming places that are able to meet their needs as well.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that commitment, and I just ask that you keep my staff updated on the review of those plans. As you know, high-quality plans are only successful if they are effectively implemented, and I know your department has hosted webinars and established a clearinghouse and taken some other actions, which I really appreciate. And why don't you all waiting for Senator Manchin? Just share some thoughts on how the department will support and monitor these plans.
So I appreciate you mentioning the actions that we have taken. We have Take your time. This is something I want to talk about. So we do have a best practices clearinghouse. Innovation doesn't come from Washington, D.C. alone. In fact, across the country, we have over 1,100 submissions of innovative practices to reopen schools and engage those students that were hardest to engage during the pandemic. So we're lifting up best practices from across the country. And, I always say we're going to heal together, we're going to learn together, we're going to grow together. And the tools that we have are at the disposal of the districts now are tools that were developed with them, not for them, with them. And I have to say that, we're continuing that conversation. We're having an equity summit next week where we're inviting everyone to come take a look at what it means to rethink addressing inequities and be bold. Our students deserve it.
Thank
Looking
you.
forward to that.
Thank you. Senator Manchin.
Senator.
Did I interrupt you?
No, not at all.
Thank you so much. Let me, a few things, and I appreciate so much, Secretary, on the difficult job you have. And I want to go through a few things because a lot of it either makes sense or doesn't make sense. But the main thing is I have a really a problem with homelessness in children. And I noticed that the budget hadn't been increased for that. But I know that we put, myself and Murkowski and all of our colleagues on both sides of the aisle supported $800 million going into that. But if the base doesn't move, because it hasn't moved, it's been flat.
Right.
It's a growing. I hope you would show attention to that. I know we were able to meet it this year, but we won't be able to meet it year after that, okay? So if you can.
Sure, and I appreciate that. I recall experiences with students in the district where I worked before who were experiencing homelessness, and I was always amazed at how they were able to engage in learning and be a part of extracurriculars with housing instability, not knowing where they were going to go. And that reduces the bandwidth for learning when you're thinking about where am I going to sleep tonight. So the money, the $800 million for homeless education through ARP is critically important. But I also want to share that the focus on community schools, and the vast proposal in the American Families Plan is also intended to address some of these issues that lead to homelessness, right?
Here's the thing, homelessness, and I was just asking, we need to describe it basically so we're all on the same page.
Right.
McKinney-Vento describes homelessness one way, and the department describes it another way. So they might show in West Virginia we don't have that many. We know what we have because we're basically talking to the schools. We know kids have been disrupted, things.
Right.
We need to get that definition on the same wavelength. Let me go through a few more. So on that one there, and the second tranche of money is supposed to come out for that, okay, McKinney-Vento. These are very, very important. The other thing I want to talk about is community college, okay? First of all, I'll talk about pre-K, 3 and 4, which I agree 1,000,000%.
Yeah.
We've been doing it when it wasn't even popular to do it. Let me tell you why we did it. Just out of nutrition. Just giving kids some stability in life. Yeah. And we had a challenge in Appalachia, so we had to. And I did it when I was governor. We've done it, and it's worked out great. So I'm glad the whole nation, because you cannot get ahead of the curve if you don't start at 3 and 4 years of age.
Right.
God bless you on that. Where I disagree a little bit on community and technical colleges, and I disagree on free. And I said, let me earn it. I've told people this, and someone said free college. I said, I have a child that's up in 30, 40 years of age. If they'd had free college, they'd still be in college. They'd never left. They loved it so much. That's just a little tidbit on that. But on community, here's the thing. Community technical colleges usually train to skill sets. It's not the same as a 4-year baccalaureate. Or it gives them a segue because their grades might have been not good enough. Okay, I understand all that. But most of it's skill sets. If we could determine the skill sets we need in different categories in different parts of our country, so if our community colleges are training for one thing in West Virginia, you're training for another thing in California, another thing in different parts of the country. If those skill sets are met by someone who's going, and we have a Stratford loan that we basically guarantee federally, you take the loan out. You accomplish that within a 2-year period of a community college, and you have that associate degree, then it should be forgiven. Let them earn it. Don't give it on the front end, earn it on the back end. You'd be surprised how much more they respect and appreciate something they've earned than something you've given them. That's the only thing I've said about that, because I can tell you, as a parent, it works and works very well, and it's very efficient. That'd be like the same as a kid getting it. Where's my allowance, Dad? And he's 35 yeyears old. You understand where I'm coming from?
Thank you, Senator. And I look forward to hearing more and working with you. we need to make sure that all students have access. We need to make
Right.
sure that all students have either access to the skill development that you mentioned, and you're absolutely right, the
or further
workforce needs.
attainment, either way.
But also, it might be an opportunity for students who don't think that they have the potential to go to college to get access to a 2-year college and then continue on to a 4-year
No problem.
school. So we're widening the net. And we know the earning potential is greater when you graduate college. And I can tell you, 21% for community college graduates. I believe this is good for the economy in the long term. It's really creating a workforce with higher earning potential, better discretionary income, and I do
What's the
think it's
dropout
good.
rate?
Yeah.
You ever look at the dropout rate? You want to know why our student loans are so high? Because we can't even demand that they have financial literacy. They come in and we can't even have a registrar say, no, you're not getting that much. Miguel, you only need 4,000. I know you qualify because your family for 11,000, but 4,000 will be fine. They can't say that. Yeah. So they end up stacking up debt.
Yeah.
2 years they flunk out or they quit because they haven't had to pay any payments at all, and all of a sudden it comes tumbling down. Yeah. We do a horrible job of managing student debt. But we're talking about eliminating it before we have people responsible for it.
We are going to be aggressive on the student debt and making sure that we're communicating, that we're advocating for students, working with students, putting the students at the center. I'm eager to get going on that, and
I can't wait to
get
work.
started.
I can't wait to work with you. And there's so many good things.
Same here. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
Thank you.
That will end our hearing today. I want to thank all of our fellow committee members for their participation. Secretary Cardona, thank you for your very thoughtful answers today and talk about the President's budget. I do look forward to continuing to work with you to support students and families in our country. For any senators who wish to ask additional questions for the record will be due Friday, June 25th at 5 p.m. The hearing record will also remain open until then for any member who wishes to submit additional materials for the record.
Thank you.
That the hearing is adjourned.
Thank you.